Imagine waking up to a landscape where the icy wind cuts into your skin like blades of ice. The heavy sky threatens a blizzard, and in front of you, a robust figure moves among the shadows of the trees. He is not an animal, but he's not like you either. He is a Neanderthal. This was the last human of his species, the last representative of a lineage that walked the earth for hundreds of thousands of years before simply disappearing. Its name was lost, its language was silenced, and its culture was erased. Today, all that remains are bone fragments, broken tools, and traces of their DNA within us Homo sapiens. But who was this last Neanderthal? How did you live? And most importantly, what happened to make him the last of his kind? Throughout history, we have told a comfortable version of this extinction. Neanderthals were primitive, dumb, and savage beings, unable to compete with our superior intelligence. But the truth is much darker and much more complex. Neanderthals were not mere extras in prehistory. They were masters of a brutal world, a planet dominated by freezing temperatures, giant predators, and relentless weather cycles. They survived where few others could. They withstood glaciations that turned entire continents into white deserts and carved a way of life from rock, bone, and fire. For 400,000 years, they dominated Eurasia, spreading from the caves of Portugal to the mountains of Iraq, forming tribes, hunting bison and mammoths, developing sophisticated tools, and possibly worshipping gods no longer remembered. But there's something even more intriguing. Neanderthals outlived everything, except us. If Neanderthals were so resilient, so adaptable, why did they disappear? Could it have been the fault of the sapiens, our direct ancestors? The idea that our species exterminated them in a primitive war is seductive. After all, the history of humanity is full of invasions and genocides. But is that how it happened? What if the disappearance of the Neanderthals was not a bloody battle, but something even more frightening? A slow, inevitable, and irreversible replacement? Modern genetics has revealed something surprising. Neanderthals were not completely extinct. They were absorbed. The DNA of billions of modern humans carries fragments of their genetic code. This means that at some point, the sapiens didn't annihilate them, but incorporated them. They married them. They had hybrid children. And little by little, Neanderthals became less a distinct species and more a shadow within us. But that still doesn't explain what happened to that last Neanderthal. He who walked alone, without tribe, without people, without anyone who spoke his language. Did he see his culture disappear before his eyes? Did he understand that it was the last one? We may never know exactly how the story of the Neanderthal people ended. But we know that, somehow, they are still here, in the features of our face, in the way our body reacts to the cold, in our predisposition to certain diseases, and even in the way we dream. And deep down, perhaps the disappearance of the Neanderthals is not just a story about the past. Maybe it's a warning about the future. Because if there's one lesson history teaches us, it's that no species is above extinction. And if they disappeared, who's to say we won't be next? But before we answer that question, we need to understand how they lived, how they hunted, how they loved, and how they thought. Because the key to understanding our own humanity may be hidden in the lives of Neanderthals. Imagine a world where survival is not guaranteed, where every sunrise could be the last, where hunger, cold, and predators are not distant threats, but a daily reality. This was the world of the Neanderthals. They didn't have cities. They had no agriculture. They didn't have advanced science. But for 400,000 years, they resisted. While entire civilizations have come and gone, as empires have fallen and technology has advanced, the Neanderthals were already there, facing ice, taming fire, and conquering Earth. But what was their life like? How did a Neanderthal live, hunt, and stay alive on a brutally hostile planet? The Europe that Neanderthals knew was an unrecognizable continent to us. For most of that time, it wasn't a place of green forests and bright cities. It was an ice desert. The cold was so intense that only the fittest survived. The seas were frozen, the winds howled like specters, and each winter was a deadly test. But Neanderthals were the ice people. Their bodies were different from ours, short, stocky, with dense muscles and possibly thicker skin. Their noses were wide to warm the freezing air before it reached the lungs. His eyes, large and deep, perhaps saw better in the dark. They were not weak. They were warriors shaped by the planet itself. Now, imagine yourself in their shoes. You wake up before the sun rises. The cold bites your skin. There is no food stored. There is no market. There are no guarantees. You need to hunt. It needs to walk for kilometers in the snow, following almost invisible tracks of prey. The slightest mistake could mean death. They hunted bison, aurochs, woolly rhinos, and even mammoths. But unlike us, who have firearms, they only had wooden spears hardened in fire. They needed to get close, risk their lives, aim for the animal's heart with absolute precision. If they made a mistake, there would be no second chance. And even after the hunt, the fight didn't end. Predators were always nearby. Cave lions, giant hyenas, and even cave bears, which could measure up to 4 meters in height. Imagine spending days stalking prey, finally bringing it down, and then seeing a colossal bear emerge from the shadows to take your food. What would you do? But Neanderthals weren't just hunters. They were caregivers. At the end of the day, they returned to their groups, where the fire burned and the children played in the light of the flames. The fire was more than heat. It was protection. It was home. It was culture. Around him, stories were told, wounds were treated, plans were made. And they cared for each other in a way that makes us question what it really means to be human. We found skeletons of elderly Neanderthals, without teeth, with broken bones that had healed. This means they were not abandoned. Someone was chewing the food for the elders. Someone was helping the injured to get up. But Neanderthals were not saints. We also found bones with cut marks from cannibalism. We don't know whether they ate their dead out of necessity or ritually. But we know that among them, life and death were much closer than we imagine. If all this was true, if they were strong, intelligent, adaptable, why did they disappear? Perhaps the answer lies in the very fire that kept them alive. Neanderthals were few. Their groups rarely exceeded 30 individuals. Living in a brutal and inhospitable world for so long may have been his greatest weakness. As the generations passed, their knowledge began to be lost. Their cultures became less connected, and when the sapiens arrived, they were an isolated, vulnerable people. They saw tall, slender strangers who brought with them a different way of living. Humans who not only hunted, but created symbols, exchanged ideas, organized themselves in much larger numbers. And without knowing it, the Neanderthals were about to face their last winter. Neanderthals were not an evolutionary error. They were not a backward people. They were an alternative humanity, a different version of what we could have been. And in some ways, they are still here, in the DNA of each of us, in the genes we inherited from them, in our resistance to cold, in our immunity to certain diseases, in our own survival instinct. But if there's one thing they can teach us, it's that no species lasts forever. The Earth was once dominated by creatures bigger, stronger, and older than us. But they all fell. The only difference between us and the Neanderthals is time. And if we want to avoid their fate, we need to understand what happened, because the answer to our future may be hidden in the past. If you want to continue this journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Leave your like to help spread this story to more people, because understanding Neanderthals is understanding ourselves. And believe me, in the next part, the revelations will be even more surprising. Imagine looking into the eyes of a Neanderthal. What would you see? A primal beast? A ruthless hunter? A lesser being? Or something much more familiar? For decades, we have been taught that Neanderthals were brutes, savages, incapable of complex thought. But this idea is wrong, very wrong. Today we know that they were much more like us than we ever imagined. The question is no longer what differentiated them from us, but yes, what really made us different from them. And the answer could change everything we know about our own humanity. When we think of Neanderthals, we imagine hunched figures with low foreheads holding a club. But this image is outdated. If a modern Neanderthal dressed like us cut his hair and walked the streets, he might go unnoticed. Yes, he would have a robust face, a wide nose, deep-set eyes, and a stocky body, but he wouldn't look like a monster. He would look human, and not just in appearance. The brain of a Neanderthal was, on average, bigger than ours. Does that mean they were smarter than us? Maybe not in the way we measure intelligence today, but what is intelligence anyway? Solve equations? Create technology? Or survive for 400,000 years in a world that would kill any of us in a few days? What if they had a kind of intelligence that we simply don't understand? Let's test a radical thought. What if Neanderthal intelligence was more focused on sensory perception? Some evidence suggests that they had much sharper vision than ours, possibly seeing details that escape us. Their wide noses indicate a refined sense of smell. Could they smell the rain before it fell? Or detect fear in a wounded animal? And the music? A bone found in Slovenia with perfectly spaced holes may have been a Neanderthal flute. If true, it means they made music more than 50,000 years ago. But what kind of music? Did they sing? Did they dance? And most importantly, did they feel emotion the same way we do? Now imagine a group of Neanderthals around a fire playing a melody lost in time. Not a song made by us, Homo sapiens, but something unique, theirs. What would we feel listening to it today? If there is a marker of humanity, it is belief in the invisible, in what cannot be touched but can be felt. And Neanderthals seem to have shared this with us. We found organized burials with bodies carefully arranged, surrounded by stones and sometimes even flowers. But why? If they buried their dead, did that mean they felt mourning? That they feared death? That they imagined a life beyond life? Now look back at human history. Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, civilizations of all times have built rituals to honor the dead. But what if this didn't start with Homo sapiens? What if this tradition, this need to remember, existed even before we were us? If Neanderthals had spiritual beliefs, this would mean that we were not the first humans to ask, what happens after death? For a long time, we thought that only Homo sapiens created art. But the caves of Spain tell another story. Marks of red pigment, dating back to more than 60,000 years ago, were made before any sapiens arrived in Europe. Who made them? And more. Eagle claws carved as necklaces, feathers selected and used for adornment. This may seem simple, but it reveals something profound. They had a sense of aesthetics. They didn't just do what was necessary to survive. They created beauty. And this brings us to a question that few dare to ask. Did Neanderthals have stories? Did they tell myths around the fire? Was knowledge transmitted between generations? Did they invent legends about the sky, animals, forest spirits? What if humanity's first storytellers weren't our direct ancestors, but rather they? So what really set Neanderthals apart from us? They had culture, they had advanced tools, they had a sense of community, and possibly even religion. They loved, they protected their wounded, they cared for their dead. But in the end, we survived. They don't. Why? Was it just a matter of luck? Of numbers? Or was there something about us, something invisible, something indefinable, that made us different? This is the question we will try to answer in the next part. But before we continue, do something to keep this story alive. Like this video and subscribe to the channel, because if Neanderthals taught us anything, It's that memory is the only thing that truly survives time. Imagine a world where you are not the only humanity, where, as you walk through an icy forest, you might find eyes unlike your own peering through the trees, where the unknown does not come from another planet or from a distant time, but from another human species. 50,000 years ago, this world existed. Neanderthals lived in Europe and Asia hundreds of thousands of years ago. But then, coming from the south, the sapiens arrived. Modern humans, bearers of a different culture, a different mentality, a way of seeing the world that would change everything. It was a meeting between cousins, but it was also the beginning of the end. Today, when two completely different cultures come into contact, what happens? Conflict, exchanges, curiosity, distrust. Now imagine this encounter not between countries, but between species. The first encounters between sapiens and Neanderthals were probably not epic battles, but quiet, cautious moments. A Neanderthal observing a group of strangers with darker skin and slimmer bodies. Sapiens facing a people with broad shoulders, deep gaze, and familiar but strangely different gestures. Did they talk? Did they sing? Did they recognize themselves as something similar? We know that contact between the two species was not just war or competition. It was coexistence. For a long time, we believed that Neanderthals were exterminated, that the sapiens arrived and with their superior technology and numbers wiped their cousins off the map. But genetics tells a different story. Today, we know that billions of people carry Neanderthal DNA. In some populations, even 4% of the genome comes from them. This means that sapiens and Neanderthals didn't just coexist, they mixed. They fell in love, they had children, and this happened many times, in different places and times. This was not an isolated event. It was something that happened over thousands of years. This changes everything. Neanderthals did not disappear because they were annihilated in a prehistoric genocide. They were absorbed. But this still doesn't answer the question, why us and not them? Neanderthals were fewer in number. Their groups rarely exceeded 30 individuals. Sapiens, on the other hand, formed larger tribes, spread faster, and exchanged information more frequently. And then came the change. The climate began to fluctuate more intensely. The cold became more brutal. Prey became scarcer. Neanderthals, already accustomed to living on the edge, now faced even greater challenges. In this scenario, sapiens had an advantage: innovation. While Neanderthals relied on traditional techniques, sapiens tested new approaches. They created more sophisticated tools, organized broader cooperation networks, and explored territories with a flexibility that Neanderthals perhaps did not have. Over time, this made all the difference. The last known Neanderthal group disappeared from southern Spain around 40,000 years ago. They left no writings. They left no monuments, just bones, tools, and genes scattered among us. And possibly one last fire lit in the heart of winter. Now imagine, you are the last of your kind. Winters are longer, food is scarcer. You wander through a world that is no longer yours. Sapiens dominate the forests. Their groups are larger. Their voices fill the silence. And you ask yourself, where are my people? And then, one night, under a starry sky, the wind blows for the last time over a Neanderthal face. And the world goes on without you. What if Neanderthals had survived? If they still existed today side by side with the sapiens, what would the world be like? Would we have shared cities? Two distinct human cultures coexisting? Or would it be that sooner or later, the fate would have been the same? We may never know, but we know this. Neanderthals were not inferior. They weren't a failed version of us. They were just different. And in the end, that difference was enough for them to disappear, while we stayed. But don't be fooled. No species lasts forever. The world once belonged to dinosaurs. It once belonged to mammoths. It once belonged to Neanderthals. Today, he is ours. But until when? If you want to continue this journey through the past to understand our own future, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Leave a like to help this story reach more people. Because in the end, remembering the Neanderthals is remembering that every story can have an end. The question is, when will ours be? Imagine a world where Neanderthals never disappeared. If you could see them today, walking among us, side by side with Homo sapiens, what would it be like? Could there be two human societies coexisting? Would we understand each other, share culture, knowledge, perhaps even the same destiny? Or would, in the end, one of us always have to disappear? The extinction of the Neanderthals was not a single, abrupt event. There was no great massacre, a final war, or a single catastrophe that eliminated them. What happened to them was much more subtle, and perhaps much scarier. They were not erased from the world. They were dissolved in it, because they are still here, inside us. If you are of European or Asian descent, up to 4% of your DNA is Neanderthal. Traces of them persist in our biology, even influencing aspects of our health. Some characteristics we associate with ourselves, such as resistance to cold, predisposition to certain diseases, and even skin and hair characteristics, come from them. Neanderthal DNA may be linked to how our immune systems respond to infections. Some inherited genes may have increased our resistance to viruses and bacteria thousands of years ago. Others, ironically, can make us more prone to allergies and autoimmune diseases. They are gone, but they still affect us. They still influence our body, our reactions, our very existence. But DNA is not everything, because a gene can survive, but a culture can disappear forever. Neanderthals were not brute beasts. They had language, art, possibly religion. But it's one thing to carry a gene from an extinct people. Another thing is loading your memory. And we forgot the Neanderthals. We don't know their myths, their stories, their names. We don't know if they had an idea of a soul, of destiny, of purpose. We don't know what they believed, what they feared, what they dreamed of. Therefore, the true end of the Neanderthals was not when the last of them died. That was when the last Neanderthal died, without leaving anyone to remember him. And this could be the fate of any civilization. After all, who can guarantee that, thousands of years from now, someone will still remember us? Neanderthals survived glaciations, colossal predators, brutal climate changes. But they didn't survive us. And the biggest lesson they leave us is simple. No species is safe. No empire lasts forever. No civilization is eternal. We were once just one of the many humanities that existed on the planet. Today, we are the only one. But will it always be like this? If Neanderthals could one day see our world, what would they think? Would they recognize us? Would they see something of themselves in us? Or would they look at our cities, at our wars, at our collapsing world, and think that we are heading down exactly the same path they did? Their extinction seemed impossible, until it happened. What if ours is too? Neanderthals were forgotten, but we can bring them back, not in the flesh, but in memory. Every archaeological discovery, every DNA analysis, every piece of this puzzle brings us closer to understanding who they really were. And to understand Neanderthals is to understand ourselves, because at the end of the day, we are all made from the same clay. If this story made you think, if it made you feel something, then don't let it get lost. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment below. What do you think we can learn from Neanderthals? They may be gone, but their story may still live on. And in the next content, we'll explore another extraordinary creature that walked alongside us, and that, in some way, is still here. Until then, and thank you for being part of this journey.